All right, and welcome back to another episode of Raul's World of Synths. I am Raul. This time around, we're going to be finishing up the Doepfer A124 Wasp filter series. In the last segment, we were looking at a comparison of the A124 to the A121, pictured over here on the far right, multi-mode filter. Just kind of compared the two. Some of the characteristics between the notch filter of one versus the notch filter of the other. If you didn't join us last time around, that's okay. This time around, we're just going to be doing modulation and other effects, but I do recommend that, if you want to see more about that, then just check out the previous demo. At any rate, this time around, our focus is going to be modulation, and I'm sort of calling it other effects. So in a standard modulation patch, we're going to be kind of concerning ourselves with the CV input number 1 over here and CV input number 2. Now you can see there's a cable already plugged in. That's actually my audio coming in from my section in the bottom. Let's take a look at that real quick. I have the blue cable here, as you can see, is bringing my output out from my VCA. There's a little more to this patch, but since I reviewed it already twice in some of the previous segments, I'm not going to talk too much about how this patch is set up, other than say that this cable, this blue one, is going to be being used for the purpose of splitting our signal up at the top a little bit later. But for now, just notice that the output is coming out from here, and so that's where sound's going to be coming out up into the very top of our Wasp filter. So now we just need to get some sound going to our mixer. So let me patch that. I'm going to be going out of my low high pass out over here, and then just going straight into input 1 of my mixer. Here we go. And there we have a little bit of signal going on. Pretty standard. So we're going to dive into modulating the frequency cutoff first, and just the standard kind of configuration you would have. We're going to be using the A147 for this. So let's start right at the top with the triangle wave. Be patching into that. And then I'm just going to go straight into CV1. Pretty straightforward. And there you can see that it is now changing the frequency cutoff right here. And it's modulating at the rate that's set over here right now. And if I want to speed it up, I can just bring up the frequency. And we can hear that being reflected now. Or if I want to kind of slow it down, I can just bring this all the way down. And we should get a nice slow sweep. So depending on what you're doing, you might use a really slow sweep on the modulation source, or you might try something fast. Let's try a different waveform. Now I'm patched for my triangle wave, and then just go into my sine. Okay, let's kind of adjust the frequency here a little bit. Okay, now this is a pretty standard configuration of a modulation type scenario that you might run into when you're patching in your modular system. But of course, there is this CV input number 2 over here, which we haven't utilized yet, so let's try that out. I'm going to take the triangle wave, and I'm just going to patch it into CV2. So essentially what's going to be happening in my Wasp filter is my triangle wave and my sine wave are going to be summed and then fed to the cutoff. So if I turn it all the way down right there, we should just be getting our sine wave, as you can see, patched into CV1. And then as I bring up CV2, it's going to increase the amount of triangle wave going in. And then I get a slightly different flavor of modulation. And if I wanted to, I could bring this all the way up. And yet another different type of modulation type effect. If I wanted to kind of shake up this patch a little bit, I could go in here and take this out. Just kind of swap positions over here. Put my sine wave over into CV2. Make sure that's all the way in. Now I have my triangle wave going at 100% to CV1. And then CV number 2 is receiving the sine wave, but at a slightly lower level, as indicated by CV2. However, they are being summed, and then that modulation sum is then going to the cutoff right there. Okay, so that's just a couple of ways that you can modulate this filter and get some interesting effects. Now, let's unpatch this, because we're going to try something a little different this time. Now, we have a couple of other modules over here. Most specifically, the A189 voltage control bit modifier. If you watch some of the videos that I did on this particular module, you know that it can also be used to modulate a CV source. So we're going to actually do that. So I'm going to take my triangle wave, patch out from that, patch it over into the signal in of my bit modifier. For some of you out there who aren't familiar with this and what it does, some other variations of this type of circuit are known as a bit crusher, so that might sound a little more familiar to you. At any rate, this is basically going to be distorting our signal going in, which is the triangle wave, and we're going to get a slightly different type of modulation result. So I'm going to take the signal out from here, and then I'm going to go right back into CV input number 1. And there we go. Make sure it's patched all the way in. There we go. Slightly different effect. Now, I do have several ways that I can sort of adjust how it's being distorted in here. I have all these different modes going on in my bit cruncher or bit modifier, so I can switch those modes to vary my modulation a little bit. It's still essentially a triangle wave, however, it is being processed through this module over here. Let's try and see if we can't get something a little more interesting. Bring this up a little bit, maybe switch. There we go. Not bad. Kind of like that one. Now I can vary the frequency of that triangle wave. Or I can bring it down. And it just provides you another way to kind of create more interesting type of modulations. Whereas the triangle wave that we had before was relatively sort of predictable. This one's a little bit more dynamic, kind of changes a little bit each time. So it sounds a little more interesting. Cool. So that's one thing we could do. So I'm going to unpatch that. Unpatch this over here. So that's our modulation example right there. But this module here, the A189, can also be used to process audio. So let's have a listen at that as well. Now in my bottom section, I'm going to go in and take a second output from my VCA, so you can see down here. So I'm going to take and plug right into the back of that. And then I'm going to go straight up into the top section and plug right into my bit modifier. There we go. So now I essentially have my low pass, high pass output going to my mixer, and I'm going to take an output from my A189, patch in there, and then go over into input 2, Might have to play with the level a little bit. I'll try a different mode. I don't like the little wobbly effect going on right there. There we go. So now we have yet a slightly different variation of our signal. Now I can adjust the taste here. I can bring this all the way down and then just get my straight Wasp filter going in there. Or I can bring this up a little bit. Maybe about there. Get a nice little healthy mix of the two. And it just gives me one more layer to the sound. So there you go. And then of course now I have all kinds of different ways that I can vary the sound. I can, adjust the mix level over here. Go more in that direction. I can adjust the cutoff. Adjust the resonance. There we go. Or I of course have all my options here in my bit modifier. I can adjust the modes for slightly different distortion. And I can just adjust to taste. So that sounds fairly interesting right there. Now at this point, I can go one step further and kind of integrate everything that we've done so far. I can go in and now bring in my modulation source, maybe my sine wave, and then go over and modulate the cutoff. To add a little more interest to the patch. Or now, since I have some CV inputs over here at my bit modifier, I can use that same modulation source, maybe my triangle wave over here, patch into that, and go into my bit crushing CV. Sky's the limit at this point. And as you can see, the processing part of this patch, we talked about the sound source part of it, the VCO and the VCA, which is located down at the bottom. But the processing part up here at the top, our modulation source as well as our filter and bit cruncher, are essentially giving us a lot of options in a very small, little, compact package. So tons and tons of possibilities with these few modules. And with that, we're going to bring this series to a close. I hope throughout the series of the Wasp filter that you got some useful information out of this. As with all the demonstrations that I do, I try to just give practical examples as well as a couple of little demonstrations that I personally think that I might like. So I'm not entirely sure which direction we're going to go in next, but whatever it is, as I like to promise, try to keep it as interesting as possible. So keep on patching out there. Thank you very much for watching this time around and for watching the series as a whole. Hope to see you next time, and thanks a lot.